This is attorney Mark Nicholson for the Circle City News, and I'm here with attorney Audrey Lunsford. We're going to talk today about the situation in Indiana. It seems like Indiana is always in the news. We have this case of the abortion, and a few weeks ago we had the situation with the officer that left with the person from prison and from the South, and they made their way all the way up here to Indiana, amazingly, before they were like ran off the road and she killed herself. Well, now we have a situation where the Supreme Court overturning abortion has caused situations that I'm sure are just going to increase, right? This is not going to be the only situation where a 10-year-old girl was raped and then could not get an abortion in Ohio, her home state, and traveled through the help of, I'm assuming, family and friends to Indiana to get an abortion by a Dr. Caitlin Bernard. Now, when this news came out, obviously there are people that are, pro-life or pro-birth that claim that this was fake news, and something ginned up by the liberal left. But come to find out, a few days later, the person that is accused of raping her was arrested and charged with it. And it was a 27-year-old man. Well, the Attorney General of Indiana, Todd Rokita, says, "Oh, I'm going to get to the bottom of this and find out what really happened and things like that." Now, you may think that he's talking about find out what happened to this 10-year-old girl, but no, he's trying to find out what's this doctor doing. What is this doctor doing? Basically defaming the doctor, which kind of is what we talked about last week, saying he's going to investigate whether she did this legally, looking at her license, seeing if there's any criminal charges that can be filed. To me, it's going in the wrong direction. We should be setting up processes in place that are protecting children from being the victims. And when they are victims, finding out a process to help them. But no, Indiana, our Attorney General, wants to do something totally different, which is try to make it even harder for victims, 10-year-old children victims of rape. And this is kind of the fallout with the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade. The latest report that I've seen says that the doctor followed the law, reported the abortion, I think 2 days after it happened. I think there's a 3-day requirement. I got a call from a reporter yesterday that wanted my opinion about it. And in his message to me, he said, well, we have a report that the actual perpetrator of this crime was 17 or was 27 and not 17 as the doctor reported. So what do you think about that? Well, if that's true, hey, who knows how the doctor came to the age. If she was given the age of 17, then she's going to report the age of 17. Obviously, it doesn't appear that she knew who this person was. And if it was a typo, because 1 and 2, whatever, then it's a typo. But the fact of the matter is, under the law, it is a crime in Indiana, and I'm licensed in Indiana. Ohio, I would assume, is probably the same thing, but I'm not licensed to practice in Ohio. I don't believe Audrey is either. But I would assume that it's against the law for a 17-year-old in Ohio to rape a 10-year-old, because I know it is in Indiana. So either way, whether the person's 17 or 27, it would still be a crime. Either way.
It's unlikely it could even be a consensual matter. So, yeah.
Yes. So I think we're going to see more of this, and I went on and on about it. In a way, it kind of sickens me that we're here in the 21st century where a woman now has less rights than she did 2 months ago, what to do with her body. But I won't go very long on this. I'll just make another point. But that is why I'm for the legalization of sex work, because it just is offensive to me that men can tell a woman that, you can have sex with me for free, but if you try to charge me, that's against the law, and I'm going to arrest you for it. So take it away, Audrey. I know you have a lot to say about it. And once again,
I think you're already more progressive than past Supreme Courts there with the sex work. But yeah, I'll just say my age here. Roe v. Wade has been in place, I think, my whole life. So this is the first time in my life that abortion has been declared non-constitutional. And it's interesting to see. I think you were talking about the leaks, but I think that the leaking of the Supreme Court issuing its ruling really did prepare a lot of the states that were going to ban abortion statewide, immediately prepared them for getting those procedures in place. So that's why, in case people are unaware, that's why somebody had to come here, the 10-year-old from Ohio to Indiana, because Indiana has yet to declare abortion unconstitutional, although a special session is currently scheduled. Is it July 25th? And I think everybody in Indiana really does anticipate at that time that the abortions will be regulated here in Indiana. We have yet to see what other fallouts happen after that. Certainly, abortion stems from a number of other rights, and those were kind of indicated within the opinion written by the Supreme Court, is if we're going to take a look at this, maybe we should look at the whole line of other what are called unenumerated rights to determine, I guess, whether those are valid. So for people who, I guess, are unaware of where that right stems from in the first place, the Constitution obviously lists a number of rights. There's a number of rights that aren't listed. Those are the unenumerated rights. And those really started with the right to privacy. So I think, Griswold v. State talks about, the right to contraceptives. That was the leading case that allowed Roe to happen. So we're talking right to contraceptives. We're talking about privacy in the bedroom. Sex between who sex can be between. And then we're talking about even, gay rights. We're talking about reproductive rights. So there's definitely a lot in question, given the opinions, kind of hinting at maybe we need to look at some of these other rights. There was even, I believe, discussions on segregation. So there's a lot of stuff in there. If we're going back to, the original Constitution was at a time in which the world was not as it is today. So right now, Indiana has some more reproductive rights than Ohio, but we have yet to see here in the next, I guess, 9 days what the new status of the law is going to be, and then criminalization or they're talking about criminalizing women who have abortions, doctor supervised abortions. That's going to open another door there. But there's a lot of moving parts here, not just with the opinion, but the opinion is also impacting different states and possibly a whole line of cases dating back to well before my time, and what the fallout is going to be from that, and where essentially where people are going to have to go if they need to exercise some of those rights, because there are still several states that we anticipate will continue as is.
Yes, and one of the things that you mentioned when you talk about the other places that the Supreme Court could go that deal with overturning the previous laws. And it's really important because one of the things that I noticed wasn't addressed or touched was the issue of Loving v. Virginia, the Supreme Court case that basically said that blacks and whites could marry, because obviously Justice Thomas is married to a white female and he's African American. So he did touch on a gay marriage a little bit and some other little right to privacy type of things, abortion pills. He didn't mention that one. And it's somewhat offensive to me to think that we are allowing our lives to be controlled by a document that is hundreds of years old, written by a white man that, had a view of this world that is different, like slavery. And didn't even think someone should be on the Supreme Court that looks like Justice Thomas or even Amy Coney Barrett. Yes, or you. Yeah, yes, yeah. And so um, I am of the frame of mind that the document is a living, breathing kind of living and a breathing type of document. There's things that when the Constitution was written, if you want to stick to the original intent, well, they weren't intending on people owning machine guns and bazookas and all these other kind of guns either. But we've interpreted that to say, well, it does include these type of automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons, things that didn't even exist back then. We've adapted the rulings to expand and say there's privacy when it comes to like your cell phone, and there's a whole host of other technology type things and stuff that has happened since that document was written that we've basically said, well, the Constitution does protect this or doesn't protect this. So trying to limit it to just what was said and thought of at that time, I think it's very, very limiting. And then trying to also project someone's religious beliefs into it, I think that is also troubling because we're supposed to be a nation that has freedom of religion, and the basis for a lot of this decision when it comes to the abortion is based on religion. The people that are voted for it on the Supreme Court, I believe all of those are, Catholic, and that is something that, in general, is against the Catholic belief. However, I don't see the same vigorous attitude by those same justices to prevent the death penalty. It would seem that as vigorous as they are against abortion is as vigorous they are for the death penalty and executing people, and how someone can be executed because the attorney screwed up, the attorney did not file something by a deadline, and these other arcane type of rules and regulations that are in place that make it difficult for someone to address if the person has been convicted and sentenced to death unfairly. So there's I guess the easiest way to phrase it is hypocrisy. There seems to be some hypocrisy with these rulings that the state can't regulate guns, really, but it can regulate abortion.
I
Okay.
think that this plant really does point out a lot of those issues about where is this going to end? And I think one of the biggest concerns has been within the privacy context and the access to contraceptives. But like you said, there's a number of unenumerated rights, that are also protected, and that includes the firearms, the expansion of the access to firearms, the right to hold those firearms. Those were not in the original Constitution the way that the rights are enumerated now, I guess, through the Supreme Court. So that's an important point to remember. And it's often the same people that are giving some enumerated rights, or articulating that some of these rights should exist that are not enumerated. That are also saying, well, they're not specifically listed. So it's kind of a pick and choose at this point. What's going to be allowed and not allowed that's not originally listed.
Exactly. And, obviously this is Circle City News where we discuss legal stuff. The point that I think people need to realize, whether you are for abortion or against abortion, this is the first time in most everyone's life that the Supreme Court has actually taken away a constitutional right, a legal right that people had. The Supreme Court has actually taken away. And that's something that hasn't really happened in our lifetime. That normally the expansion of rights, not the restriction of rights. And one of the things, I know Audrey and I have talked about this throughout the weeks and things, but there's all this talk about, oh, they're coming to take our guns away. Oh, Obamacare, they are violating my constitutional right to not have health care or forcing me to have health care. Oh, under Biden, oh, it's like slavery to wear this mask. It's taken away my constitutional right, to wear a mask and not wear a mask. And all that basically hypothetical talk, because that stuff is not even true. It just didn't happen. But here's a case where people's rights, at least half of the population, over half, how many women are in the United States, their rights have been taken away. Their rights have actually been taken away. So whether you are pro-abortion, pro-birth, or pro-choice, whatever you are, it should cause concern to everybody that they've actually taken away a constitutional right. And I've just not seen that really in my lifetime. Chipping away at certain things, okay, but I've not seen the wholesale taking away of a right. When you think of Brown versus Board of Education, it's taking that, basically saying people could be segregated and saying, no, we shouldn't have segregation. But that doesn't mean that people can't still segregate. I mean, if you don't want to be around black people, you don't want to have black friends, just don't do it. If you don't want to have white friends, just don't do it. If you want to go to a predominantly white school or create your own school, and it's a private school, and the majority of the people there are white or black or whatever, it's not too hard to find schools where the population is predominated by one ethnicity over another. But at the bottom line, the Supreme Court, and I just can't stress that enough, the Supreme Court took away a constitutional right, and that's just frightening. Oh, and you made another point earlier about the leak of the draft opinion, Audrey. I think that the leak, still they haven't found out who leaked it, but I almost believe that it was someone that was from the in support of that position, right? And the reason why I say that is because it helped kind of blunt the news. Like, I don't see the benefit of somebody, on the left, the liberal, to do it, because this is kind of blunting the news that it's getting ready to get overturned. It's almost like when the actual report came out, it was almost like it was old news, because we already had heard and read the draft opinion, and it was almost like releasing it kind of cemented it, like by whoever leaked it. It's like, now you're cemented in that position, because the whole nation knows this is what you wrote, so you're not going to go back and be a backtracker or something like that. So to me, it just seemed like it benefited the people that were in support of that position to release it, rather than somebody that was on the other side. And that may be the reason why we don't know who leaked it yet, because it was one of the people that was in support of that position.
Well, and definitely the leak gave, some of the states an opportunity to prepare in advance for what they were going to do as soon as it was released. And you mentioned, Brown versus Board of Education. That was the first time in that leaked draft where we heard that they're talking about all these other cases and their legitimacy. And that's, I think, where people who strongly believe in these rights start getting really nervous about how far back are we going? And,
right.
And what outside of abortion, what rights are in question? Because if they can take something that's been in place for 50 years and say, nope, that's not a right anymore, then what else are we looking at next?
Right. I mean, what else are we? And I mean, that should cause people in the LGBTQ community to have concerns. I mean, I think
those rights are more recent than Roe.
Right. And I think I don't have the opinion pulled up, but I think Justice Alito may have some kind of comment that, in the opinion, this doesn't mean that, we'll look at other rights or something like that. I think he was trying to provide cover that, well, we're not talking about anything else other than abortion. But of course, Clarence Thomas, went much further by pointing out specific cases that he thought were wrongly decided. So it's go ahead.
Not to mention the fact, though, that several of the justices that supported the opinion publicly said that they weren't going to overturn that. So I don't have a lot of faith in those statements myself.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That I think is something that's kind of been missed as well. At least, I haven't really talked much about that, but these are the same justices that, when they were asked, publicly about, stare decisis, and this decision, it was like, well, it's settled law. It's, and, you know, none of them got in there and basically, this is my recollection, none of them said, I think Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. Because they
No,
did. Yeah.
no, and this isn't an opinion, is not an opinion. This is a fact. You can go back and look at their interviews before joining the Supreme Court, and you're right. Stare decisis. If that's the law, we're going to continue the law. We're not looking to overturn it, but here we are now, and so I don't have full faith in other rights, or this just staying with Roe. I think even with Roe being overturned, even without looking at separate rights, if you look at just connected rights, this just has. I mean, Roe is what all reproductive rights stand for. So not just abortions, but then there's going to be the question of what constitutes abortion. When does life start? If it's at conception, does that mean that there's going to be certain birth controls that are going to be inaccessible? So I think the reproductive rights overall are going to be questioned by Roe alone, let alone the privacy, unenumerated rights that constituted Roe being in place in the first place.
Yeah. And, we've used the phrase stare decisis, and it, basically the definition of that is it's a doctrine or policy of following rules or principles laid down in previous judicial decisions. So basically, it's like this case is already set, and we're just going along and following that previous case law. So this is the law. We just follow the law, follow the law, follow the law because it's already, been decided. Unless, of course, it contravenes the original or the ordinary principles of justice, which I would say, okay, we're not going to follow the Plessy versus Ferguson or some law that, says separate but equal, because it does violate the ordinary principles of justice. So you get Brown versus Board of Education, which is like, hey, we need to break that down. Same thing with Loving versus Virginia. We should not have people that are both adult humans not being able to marry each other just because of their ethnicity or their sexual, preference, meaning they want to marry someone that is of the same sex. It just seems like it violates the ordinary principles of justice when you have two consenting adults. I just think that those justices, in my opinion, have lost the credibility if you are so vigorous, and I'm very outspoken, as most people that know me know. If your belief, it is your true belief, like when did you come to this belief that you thought this was wrongly decided? Was it after you got on the Supreme Court? Because if you believe that while you're getting nominated, I just don't know why you don't get in and tell the truth and just say, hey, I believe it's wrongly decided. If the case comes before me, if the right case becomes before me, yes, I would overturn Roe v. Wade because I think it's wrongly decided. Simple as that.
Well, and Loving was just a few years, I think, before Roe v. Wade. Those, that happened around the same time. The interesting thing is if we start looking at these other cases within the context of unenumerated and privacy rights, are with abortion you can kind of look going forward, but if you're talking about like Loving and Brown, like how do you go backwards to the point where, like, if people are already married, are you going to criminalize it? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like abortion, you can say like, okay, we can't do this anymore, but like, are you going to undo what's already done? Or is it just going forward? How would all of that work, and what does it look like? With abortion, I think one interesting component that we haven't really talked about is, the medical perspective to it. I have a lot of friends, that are doctors and nurses, and they take an oath, and that oath includes providing medical treatment and consulting. And a lot of them are really upset about Roe v. Wade because they feel like they're not ethically allowed to do some of the things they were before. So I don't know. The whole thing is just, it doesn't just affect one person. It really affects the whole, everybody.
Yeah.
And then even, after birth, then we talk about, pro-life versus pro-birth is just the mindset that there's really not a lot of help out there once the babies are born, and there's not really anybody doing anything about that. I think anybody who's ever worked in public interest or providers knows that there's a lack of support for babies out there, and for kids and for families who are in need. I myself I've been in public interest most of my life, and I think that's another concern. There's just this whole ripple effect of, like I said, a lot of moving parts, but what's going to happen, in a few years from now when there's all these extra needs out there and there's no one to meet the needs. Because right now, honestly, right now, there's not enough services to meet needs that are currently in existence.
Right. And that's an interesting point, too, because despite the fact of the children when they're born not getting all the help that they need, there's another, I think, interesting component is what are the exceptions? We sometimes hear about exceptions to abortion. Well, you can have abortion, under the situations of, health of the mother, rape, or incest. Well, who decides who's raped? Right? So if a woman comes in and says, hey, I want to have this abortion because I was raped, well, how do they prove she was raped? That's what we're going through now with this 10-year-old. It's like, oh, wait, I don't believe she was raped. Okay. And then it's like, oh, they put down that it was a 17-year-old, not a 27-year-old. But what about if the person lies and said, hey, I'm 17, not 27, and let's have this relationship. I'm going to, do whatever, and rapes them, and they lie about it. What about if the person doesn't even know the identity of the rapist and it's like, hey, I was raped, I don't know who it was, and then you write down that, the person doesn't even know who it was. Do they have to actually report it as a crime before it meets the exception? Do that person have to go to trial and get convicted first? To me, it's just like once I'm not saying they do this, but it's almost like it's one way or another. Either you can have it or you can't.
Yeah, and you're right, though, because historically there were exceptions for the well-being of the mother, and that include physical and emotional things. And the issue was then it was disproportionately affecting minorities and poor people with regards to having that access. Because if it's the discretion of, the doctor or certain people, then a lot of times it wasn't across the board applied evenly.
Yes. Yeah, and we can go on. We'll have to have a part 2 on this because, I'll say that that's a whole nother aspect of it about keeping people poor and people that could normally maybe go on with their life, move to a better area, get a better job. Well, now you force them to have a child. They don't have child care, so they stay home, or they're broke because they're paying for child care. They have to leave the workforce or they can't look for a job because they're pregnant. So this is a way to keep some people that are poor, or someone that is on the rise to becoming wealthy, getting a good job, taking them out of the workforce because they get pregnant. Now, we know through the United States, there's going to be places that will keep abortion legal. But the problem is that will only be for people that can afford it. Because if you live in a state where it's illegal and you have to travel to 2 or 3 states before you can get to the place where it's legal, then that's going to totally benefit the people that are wealthy. And we've been here before, when abortion was illegal. It was, well, if you're wealthy, just have your rich parent take you to another country or another state and get you an abortion, and then you come back and you're just fine. It probably wouldn't even been a thing had that 10-year-old child maybe had wealthy parents and they just took the person to Indiana, had the abortion, and then came on back to Ohio and maybe not even made it in the news. But I'm assuming that there was probably some issues with the family, and it caused this to become a national story instead of, okay, hush, hush, my 10-year-old daughter's pregnant. which no one I would think would want their 10-year-old daughter being pregnant, especially against her will.
God, I would hope not.
Right. So it seems like, there was some other issues going on, unfortunately. Well, do you have any last words before we leave?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I could talk about this all day because there's just so much to it. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that people have understood all the different ramifications that can come from this. And that's why it's so hard for the politicians to wrap their heads around it, because, like, okay, we knew it was coming and we still haven't figured out a solution. But now they're going to have to. They're going to have to. And when they do, I mean, it's going to have immediate draconian effects on people that do want to have an abortion.
if we have a part 2, Mark, it's going to have to be after July 25th because I'm going to want to hear what happens in that legislative session.
Yeah, I like that. Yes. Excuse me. I like that idea of doing it after the legislative session to find out, find out exactly what they plan on doing. And then we can kind of follow up to what the new law is and stuff like that. So, well, this is Attorney Mark Nicholson and Attorney Audrey Lunsford for the Circle City News, where we discuss legal stuff. Take care and have a fantastic weekend and next week as well. Bye-bye now.